Hello and welcome to another tutorial designed to showcase the best working practices for using Receta. In this video we'll be taking a look at the best practices to use when allocating and managing your stock within Receta, with particular focus on the features within a specific production used to allow us to run large productions in tandem across the full Rec, FP through to CProd range. The topics we will cover are 1. Allocation of stock for a production, including the paperwork generated. 2. Part allocation of a production and the implications, what is meant by catch-up allocation and how we can use it on a live running production or correct our allocation after a production is finished. 3. Understanding the basics of part bookings on a live production. And 4. How to reconcile stock and what you need to be aware of before completing this for a finished production. Okay, let's dive in. Number 1. Allocation of stock for a production, including the paperwork generated. The first task you will often perform on a planned production will be the allocation of stock. This can be reached against the production itself on the production schedule. Clicking to allocate the stock will take you through to a page similar to this. Here we can see a list of the overall materials which will be used during this production and the overall amount of that material needed. Next to each material you can then see the individual batches which are available to be used. Specific batches may be disabled from use when they are either past their expiration date or have not yet been released from your stock release area, should that be enabled on your version. Dependent upon your version of Receta, in most cases it will attempt to auto-allocate the correct amount needed from the batches available, and it's worth understanding how that works. In general, Receta will always use the stock likely to expire first. However, in cases where several batches exist of the same expiration time, Receta will attempt to find the best match for the overall quantity compared to the individual quantity batches held against any specific batch. In effect, it is trying to make the most efficient choice for your pickers to avoid having to open several batches of stock. It should be noted, any items without a location would automatically drop to the bottom of the list. There's one additional feature to be aware of for this section, something called priority locations. Within the location setup of Receta, you can elect to make one or more locations a priority location. In practice, this means that when allocating, Receta will initially look to the stock located in that area before looking at the wider stock you have elsewhere. This setup is often used in cases where you have a physically smaller or satellite storage area close to your production area which you wish to pre-locate the stock you will use. By using the stock usage planner report, your warehouse staff can easily see the overall usage against any materials for the upcoming productions for the date period they select. This stock can then be pre-moved to the priority locations ahead of time. And when the actual allocation takes place, not only will Receta auto-pick from that location, it will also mean your picking team can easily provide the right materials at the right time for the next production. By coupling the above with the preferred location report, your warehouse team can move to a just-in-time model of picking and increase your production efficiency. Before we move on to the next section of this video, as a final point, it is worth being aware of how important the allocation of the correct stock is to ensuring accuracy with your stock holding. Later in this video, we will cover catch-up allocation and reconciling, and it's worth understanding that should those tasks not be performed correctly, it is very easy for the subsequent productions using those same materials to be attempting to allocate stock which physically has a different stock level to that which Receta thinks. Key things to look out for when identifying this kind of issue will be odd quantities of Rec or FP left over from previous productions, or very small quantities of an older batch of an ingredient. However, for now, let's assume that the stock showing is correct and we're happy with the batches allocated. Let's move on to something called part allocation. On the previous screen, we were able to fully allocate the production as we were lucky enough to have all of the required stock we needed available to us. However, there may be cases where you wish to start a production without the stock being fully available to cover the whole job. This commonly occurs in situations such as large productions, where you don't yet have the full quantity of materials available, but are aware that the remaining items you need are either A, being delivered shortly, or B, being produced. By being produced, what that means is that in practice, you can start your rec production fully allocated, for example. Then when the first part of that rec production is booked in, using the part booking options, which we will cover shortly, you can then start the FP production part allocated and catch up that allocation as and when the required additional materials become available. In layman's terms, this means that you're able to run the full 2 or 3 linked productions rec through to FP prod in an offset tandem method rather than needing to wait for the first part of the production cycle to complete before moving to the next. Okay, so how do we administer the part allocation setup? The main feature to be aware of when running a job part allocated is that the 2 methods you can use to perform what is called catch-up allocation. Catch-up allocation involves using the same screen as the main allocation screen, but via a running production, when you are aware that new stock with which this particular production could use has become available. So let's see that in practice. Here we can see a new production for an FP. I'm just about to allocate the job as normal. However, as you can see, the underlying rec doesn't have enough stock for me to use. Receta will attempt to use what it can of the stock you have available. However, if we choose to allocate this job without the full quantities required, you can see that when I click submit, that I get a warning informing me that I'm only part allocating this job. If we now return to the production schedule, we can see the battery icon in front of the production is now showing with a lightning bolt through it. This indicates that this job has been part allocated. Okay, so how do we now catch up this allocation for this production as and when new stock, in our case the rec stock, becomes available? There are 2 ways of performing this task. 1, during the running production, or 2, after the production is complete. The recommended method is to perform the catch-up as the job is actually using the newly available stock. However, in practice, you are free to work things as you wish. I'll now show you how to catch-up allocate on a running production. If we go into our part allocated FP, we can see along the top of the grey navigation options the new option entitled Catch-up Allocation. We can also see a number in a red circle to the left of this title. This number is letting us know how many items now have stock available which we can use against this production. It should be noted that this number updates automatically within 3 seconds of the new stock being made available. That covers both bought-in RMs and underlying production materials such as RECs and FPs. In the event that the new stock does become available, that number will change to let you know. You can then click the navigation point, click the button to catch up allocate, and use the new screen to select the batches available in exactly the same way as a regular allocation. The amount shown as being required will be the amount outstanding from the initial allocation. Any catch-up allocations performed are added onto the existing allocation stored against this production. You can perform this catch-up allocation as many times as you like during the running production for each and every time new stock becomes available. In our example, we are waiting on new rec stock becoming available to use. If another user is running the rec production and uses the part booking options, which we'll get to shortly, to add a finished mixed batch of the rec production into stock, the screen on the FP production would auto-update and the catch-up allocation could be performed. This could be repeated for each and every time new stock became available. A reprint of the picking list at this point would then show the newly added allocations for your picking team. The final thing to note about this section relates to catch-up allocation after a production completes. If you do not perform the catch-up allocation on a production, which could be for many reasons, but then wish to retrospectively perform this task, Simply view the job in the production log and the option will be available for you. An important point to note: running a job part allocated without completing the catch-up allocation when physically additional stock has been used can easily result in stock discrepancies. Use this with care and accuracy. Okay, now let's look at the next section of this video, part bookings. As mentioned a few times already, the term part booking is a feature of productions which can increase the speed with which follow-on productions and/or dispatches can be made without the requirement for the running production to fully complete. Let's go back to our example above with the part allocated FP job. In this case, the FP job is waiting for more of the rec stock to become available. Traditionally, this would require the whole of the rec production to complete and its final total to be added into stock before that could be used in the following FP production. With the part booking feature, that doesn't have to be the case. Let's imagine a scenario where our underlying rec production is for a very large overall quantity spanning several batches stroke mixes. It doesn't make sense for the FP production, where using catch-up allocation or not, to have to wait for all of those to complete. To get around this, the staff member running the rec production can use the part booking button. Here, they can enter the amount they wish to book into stock at that moment in time and the location. This can be repeated several times during the live production. When this action happens, that stock then immediately, stock release notwithstanding, becomes available to the FP job. As you can see on screen, the current amount already part booked in is always available to the user so they can easily see how much stock they have already provided to the next production. Upon the normal completion of this production, the final actual stock should still be used and Receta will automatically calculate the correct stock figure based upon the amount produced, the amount already booked in and the amount of that part booked in stock already used in another production. As you can see, using part allocations, catch-up allocations and part bookings becomes a very powerful set of features to really push forward the speed with which you can run productions through Receta. Now, in our final part of the video, let's take a look at stock reconciliation and understand the nuances to performing this task correctly. After a production is fully completed, in many cases there may be a difference between the amount originally planned, and therefore allocated against, and the amount actually produced. This can be for many reasons. However, it is important that the differences in the amount of underlying stock allocations which were actually used are accurately added / removed in Receta. To do this, we use the stock reconcile area against any production which completed with a difference, and this can be found on the production log. At this point, it's worth understanding that we would recommend that stock reconciling is completed on finished productions no later than the next working day, and ideally this should be completed ASAP after the production is completed. By completing this task and correcting any stock differences ASAP, you are ensuring that the new production allocations, which may use this stock, are only allocating using accurate stock data. Okay. Let's go to the production log and check out the job needing to be reconciled. Here we can see that for this production, the amount requested was 6,000 units, whereas we actually produced 16,000 units. This effectively means that we could have potentially used an additional 10,000 worth of additional capsule shells and 10,000 worth of weight of rec. Obviously, if this is a rec job, the materials listed will relate to ingredients. And for a C-Prod job, it will be for the C-Prod bomb items, including the FP. The critical thing to understand before performing this task is to understand why there is a difference on this production in the first place. In our example, we're looking at an FP job. Therefore, if the FP encapsulation ran underweight, you could easily end up with more finished FP than was originally intended. Conversely, an FP running overweight would likely produce less than the original requested amount. We would recommend that the staff completing productions use the production notes against the job to inform the reconcile team of the reasons for the difference. Indeed, if Receta is set to send a notification to the user in the event of a production stock difference, the production notes are actually included in the notification email. Okay, back to our example. In our case, we've established that we ran these capsules underweight and therefore produced a lot more than were originally requested. In practice, this means that we must have used more of the capsule shells than originally allocated, but we didn't use any more of the rec mix. The rec mix stayed the same, we just ended up getting more finished capsules from it. Therefore, in this example, we need to reduce the shells by the further 10,000 and ignore the stock for the rec, as that was allocated correctly. To do this, we first look at the capsule shell lines. On the left, we can see the initial amount picked, the amount we actually likely used, and therefore Receta's calculation as to how many more we need to take out of stock. Obviously, if we had underproduced, this stock level will be looking to bring back more stock into the system. Okay, on the right hand side we can see the original batches which were originally allocated to this job. We can then elect to take more from this batch or batches, or if you know that you actually took stock from a different unrelated batch, you can choose to take stock from there. For the rec line, we simply click the Ignore Discrepancy button, as we don't need to change this item stock level at this time. Upon completion of this page, we click Submit and the additional stock changes are made and tied to this production. It is vital that this action is performed correctly. Failure to correct and maintain accurate records can easily lead to stock inaccuracy, which in turn has huge knock-on effects with future allocations for the same materials. In many cases, it may be a requirement that a physical weight count of the material being returned to stores for the batches used is performed to enable the correct additional amount to be booked in or out during the stock reconcile. And that completes this video outlining the key features of stock usage during the production. I hope you found it helpful and can use some of the features described to increase your efficiencies and accuracy within the stock management of your business. Thanks for watching.